So if you've watched other videos from this channel, you might already know that I come from Canada. You might also know that some of the content here is me comparing and contrasting my Lithuanian experience with Canadian experiences, as well as with my time living in the UK and other parts of the world. Today, I'll go over what I think is the biggest difference with Lithuanian restaurant culture, particularly as it compares to the North American dining experience. I'll also try to figure out why things are the way they are in Lithuania. There are pros and cons to the experience, but without wasting any more time, let's get started. So the big issue I wanted to talk about is the massive difference in the attitude of servers and overall service in restaurants. I would say that in Canada, or at least many parts of Canada and in the United States, servers at sit-down restaurants are trained to be warm and friendly. While the level of friendliness will obviously differ between restaurants and their price points, a friendly server in North America will do some or all of the following things. They might first greet you and ask how you're doing. They might introduce themselves with their name, announcing that they will be your server. And in some cases, they will walk by after your meal has been delivered, and they'll ask you if everything is to your liking. And all of this tends to be delivered in a warm and friendly tone. I find that this is completely different than the restaurant experience in Lithuania. In my dining experiences over the past couple years, I would say that the most you'll get from servers is a standard greeting like Sveiki or perhaps Laba diena, as they drop off menus at your table. Then a few minutes later, they come by to take your order and deliver things shortly after, and well, that's pretty much it, until it's time to pay. I wouldn't call any part of this experience rude or impolite, but it does stand in stark contrast to the North American dining experience. At the time of researching for this video, I've asked a few foreigners as well as a Lithuanian who has also lived abroad about this big difference. And thankfully, they all confirm that they noticed the same thing, agreeing that restaurant service in Lithuania is, well, somewhat lacking. Before I try to unpack and dissect the reasons for this different experience, I want to share one of my worst Lithuanian restaurant experiences with you. It was in August 2022 that I sat down at a Vilnius restaurant serving traditional Lithuanian cuisine. I'd come here probably 10 times over the years, and the experience has always been okay. At worst, their service is extremely slow, and I've already come to expect an emotionless server with minimal interaction. But on this one weekday evening in August, I came in and sat down and waited for my friends to arrive. I was expecting someone to bring me a menu, but after 5 minutes of having restaurant staff walk past me, I just got up and took a menu myself from the table by the door. At the time, I think there were a few different tables occupied with guests outside and one other group with me inside. Overall, the place was about 20% full, with at least 2 servers working in this medium-sized facility. About 10 minutes later, my friends arrived and they took their time looking over the menu too. Then we waited, and waited, and waited. About 15 more minutes had passed before I suggested we get up and leave. One friend suggested waiting a little bit more, and during that time, servers would walk past our table, and we assumed that once they were free, they would come and take our order. But the pinnacle of ridiculousness was when we saw the 2 servers standing around near the door, looking out the window because they had nothing else to do. It was so weird, and it really, truly felt like we were at some magical table that made us invisible to the world. At that point, the 3 of us got up and left. And, well, I probably won't be returning to that restaurant again, or at least for a while. I doubt that this has happened to many other people in Lithuania, but if you have some restaurant horror stories, do leave them in the comment section. I'd love to read them. But moving on to the next part of the video, what might explain this type of experience? One foreigner who spoke with a server says that overall, restaurant staff these days tend to be overworked, underpaid, and also undertrained. If that's true, then this would pretty much explain everything. If you look through various posts on the Foreigners in Vilnius website, restaurants these days are offering people about €5 an hour after taxes. Some offers mention that tips will be shared, while other posts don't specify. With the current minimum wage set at €4.47 per hour as of January 1st, 2022, I wouldn't be surprised if most restaurants are paying their servers close to the bare minimum. This may not be as bad in smaller cities and towns in this country, but in Lithuania's larger cities like Vilnius, This wage may not adequately cover the cost of living, especially with recent spikes of inflation. On top of low wages, there might not be much training of staff. After all, if the cultural norm is to do the bare minimum, then perhaps training on how to interact with customers isn't a necessity. And if we combine this with a zero or low tipping culture, then restaurant staff will have very little incentive to offer good service to customers. My wife always tips around 10%, even if the service sucks. My philosophy is to tip for good service, but what about you? Where do you stand on the cultural practice of tipping? So hopefully at this point, you're not too annoyed with me dumping on servers and restaurants in Lithuania, because I do see the many reasons for why workers aren't exactly motivated to be warm or friendly with customers. Being overworked and underpaid is really just a recipe for disaster. However, would you believe me if I told you that I'm quite alright with some of this cold behavior? Because in my opinion, I think that North American restaurant culture goes a little too far with the customer interaction. I don't need to be asked how my day is going, and rarely do I need to know my server's name unless something goes wrong. But when it comes to a check-in visit after the meal is delivered, I actually think this is a good thing. Sometimes soup is delivered without a spoon, or something about the dish just isn't right. And I think having a procedure where the waiter checks in is helpful. I'd rather not have to wave my arm high up in the air to get someone's attention. Oh, and I don't know about your own experiences, but it seems like servers only come to ask how things are going once you've put a whole bunch of food in your mouth and you're unable to speak properly. Has that ever happened to you? I have a great story of a Canadian restaurant experience that demonstrates how the opposite end of customer interaction can be uncomfortable as well. I was in Vancouver meeting an old friend for dinner, and we were at an upscale restaurant in the business district of the city center. The unfortunate thing about that night was that the waitress ended almost every sentence with hun, as in honey, an occasional term of endearment in English. So the waitress would start with, "Hi hun, what can I get you to drink?" "Sure hun," would be her response to almost everything. And this continued throughout the meal, including when she checked in to see how our food was. Everything ended with hun. And this continued at the point that we were ready to pay. I found this to be awkward, weird, and completely unnecessary. The absolute opposite end of the spectrum from the cold and detached interaction of Lithuanian servers. Most people I talk to agree that some Canadian and American restaurants go a little too far with their hospitality, and I think myself and others would be happy with something between the two extremes. While I can hope for things to change, I don't really think this is one area that will be improving anytime soon. Labor shortages and high cost of living might just mean that people in the restaurant industry continue to be overworked and underpaid. So if you're going to be visiting Lithuania from somewhere else in the world, where restaurant workers are a little more proactive and friendly, then I guess you should adjust your expectations so that you don't walk out of every restaurant in Lithuania disappointed. So for everyone still watching, what is the restaurant culture like where you're from? If you're from Lithuania, is my description of things and their reasons somewhat accurate? Well, leave a comment down below and let me know. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.